Board as, oh, thank you, Natalie. I forgot to mention we're recording this meeting, and this is so that you can have a recording of this. We will send it out to everyone. Natalie has come on board at Italian Portland as our events coordinator, and she's just been amazing. Moving forward in 2022, we're super excited to have her on board. So I'm going to quickly read her bio, and then I'm going to pass the torch over to Natalie. Natalie is a second-generation Italian with grandparents coming from Lazio, Abruzzo, and Sicily. She spent the major part of her life living in California and working in the field of information technology. Now she lives in Portland and enjoys studying Italian, getting outdoors, and cooking. Natalie's grandmother from Abruzzo would spend the summer with her family when she was a child. So Natalie learned to make the traditional recipes of Abruzzo. She enjoys making these dishes still today. Several years ago, she worked on a project to renovate a family home in a small hill town in northern Lazio. Natalie keeps close connections with her Italian family in Lazio and Abruzzo and travels to Italy every summer. And with that, I would like to pass the torch to Natalie.
Okay. Welcome everyone to Italian Portland's first event of 2022. We really appreciate you all signing up and joining us. Before we get started, I wanted to explain a little bit about the Zoom meeting. So first of all, we will keep all of the attendees on mute throughout the event. Attendees can post questions in the chat and we'll answer at the end of the presentation. For the best experience, we would recommend that you set your Zoom meeting to speaker view. Up in the top right corner, there's an option to set that. If you put your cursor up there and click on the view options and look for speaker view, you'll get a better experience that way. So with that, we'll go, and we've covered the technical details, so we're going to go ahead and start with the event. Today we have Patricia Badia-Johnson. She's here to introduce the participants to the extraordinary life of Orienta Badia, a second-generation Italiana who possessed rare and pertinent talents that still remain so in 2022. Orienta was born with the gift of dance and helped support her family during the Great Depression. She unknowingly followed the Italian immigrant tradition of writing down the history, values, and tradition of her family and culture, and write she could. The book brings to light so many current issues and how they were dealt with during the Great Depression and the decades that followed. For this event, it'll run about 90 minutes. To let everyone know what's coming up, we'll go through the event in this order. We're going to start with a presentation by author Patricia Badia-Johnson, and with that, we have some introductory comments from a special guest, Dr. Ilaria Serra. That will be followed by a brief discussion on the writings of Orienta with Patricia and Natalie, myself. Then there will be time for audience Q&A. So during the event, if you can post your questions to the speaker in the chat, and we'll wrap up with those questions. At the very end, we'll have a couple of closing remarks about upcoming events and follow-up for this event, how you'll receive the recording. So with that, I'll introduce our speaker, Patricia Badia-Johnson. The love of children propelled Patricia into an uninterrupted 32-year career, teaching math for 7 years and serving as a school counselor for 25 years in 6 states. In 1999, the University of Santa Clara named her the Alumna of the Year for Counseling and Psychology program. Her work with children continued up until last year as a court-appointed special advocate for the CASA program in Clackamas County, Oregon. Early on, social justice issues were front and center when she made several trips to Delano, California to support Cesar Chavez's farm workers movement. Encouraged by her mother, Patricia has been writing since she learned cursive in the 3rd grade. Poetry, news articles, essays, editing, book forwards, and curriculum saw her busy with a notepad and pen. Today, Patricia lives in Westland, Oregon, enjoying her centralized location. Tanya, could you put that person that just came on?
I think
Take them out.
it's Sri Raha.
Yeah, thank you. Today, Patricia lives in Westland, Oregon, enjoying her centralized location between her 2 children, oldest brother and sister, and numerous cousins, nephews, and nieces. 5 grandchildren and 16 great-grandchildren are less than a half day's drive away and visit regularly. The Italian American community in Portland welcomed Patricia in 2008. She served on the board of Amici d'Italia for 8 years and was an active member in the West Side Italian Cultural Group and is now board member at large for Italian Portland. Traveling extensively in Italy 5 times, taking granddaughters and daughter back with her twice, has been her great joy. She hopes to return once again next year. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Patricia.
Thank you, Natalie. First of all, I'd like to give some thanks. I want to thank Tanya Hamilton. Tanya and Christina Edick, I think it was 6 years ago, started the West Side Italian Culture Group. It was very, very popular, and people enjoyed it immensely. And then COVID came along. But just prior to that, they reached out and wanted to incorporate the larger Portland metro area. And so Italian Portland was born. And I just want to thank Tanya for her great devotion to promoting Italian culture in the Portland area. There's just no stopping this gal. I also want to thank Natalie, because I have to admit, at 80, I'm just not the most techie person around. And she has guided me through this whole process. So thank you again, Natalie, for all your help. And thirdly, we have a very special person with us, Professor Ilaria Serra from Florida Atlantic University. And it was because of Professor Serra that I really ended up going forth with this project of publishing Orienta's writings. I met her at Portland State University. She was lecturing on her book, really. It's called The Value of Worthless Lives. And it was about the writings of first-generation Italians, not to be published, but really so that their families would continue to know and appreciate the culture. And this grew out of her doctoral thesis, I believe. This is a book I highly recommend. I shared with her at that time my discovery of a cardboard box full of writings in my mother's basement. And these writings turned out to be my mother's complete writings. It was just like getting to know my mother all over again. But because of Professor Serra's encouragement and what she had done by example, I was encouraged. I needed to go through with Mom's writings. A little bit about Professor Serra. In the last 5 years, she has published 13 peer review articles, 7 book chapters, 2 edited books, and 4 edited proceedings. In a program at Florida Atlantic University, she received a faculty curriculum grant for European Movement Films of Migration. She was honored by the Italo-American Cultural Society for her dedication to Italian studies in 2019. She was born in Venice, Italy. She is a professor of Italian and comparative studies at Florida Atlantic University. and she also earned her PhD at that institution. Her research covers Italian cinema, Italian literature, Italian song, and history of Italian migration to the United States. She leads the FAU Study Abroad program in Venice, Italy, where she also teaches the course entitled Venice and Its Reflections. She recently received an European Union Jean Monnet Center of Excellence grant. Her most recent book, which I have here, called Italian Cantata, Italian History Through Song from Napoleon to Berlusconi, 1797 to 1997, has just come out. And I really can't think of a better way to learn Italian history. And so, Ilaria, we really thank you for staying up late tonight to be with us. And we give you our grateful welcome to Italian Portland. If you'd like to say a few words.
Yes, thank you very much. What a nice presentation. I didn't think to be such a big part of this presentation. It's all about you, Patricia. And congratulations to the association. It's amazing that you keep on doing these beautiful meetings, and you have 1 hour and a half now to dedicate to an Italian story. I admire you. I like this very much. So I just would like to say that my research started by chance, when one day one older gentleman came and knocked at my door in my office and said, I don't speak English, I only write Italian, and I really want to tell the stories of my life to my daughters before I die. And I said, oh, okay, what can I do for you? Can you type it up because you read Italian and then maybe translate it? And so that's what I did. And what struck me the most was the fact that he really wanted to tell a story, that he was just an ice cream maker, not a lot, not a big career, not a huge amount of money, not a big success. He just wanted to tell his story, the story of his life for his daughters. And that started my research. So I went and looked around and asked, and found that many other people really wanted to tell a story of migration to their grandchildren or children. And what was most striking was that this writing came as an act of healing the trauma of migration, because very often the crossing of the sea created a huge chasm, a huge gap in the family history that the immigrants suffered for. And so they didn't want to continue this break through to the forward generations. So what they did, they started to tell their story, to saw in a way the past and the present, and to make a healing gesture for their family and for themselves. Only having this book published was for them a goal, to have their life that was signed and scarred by migration, to have their life put all together and woven into a narrative was enough for them to feel good and to make their family feel good. So they really wanted this book to be published between two cardboard covers and protected and saved for the future. So this is what I studied, and then I met Patricia, who had this amazing story in a box. And what actually happened is that your mom didn't write her autobiography directly; she wrote a novel. So she went one step further. Not only she spoke about her life, but she did it in a very imaginative way by telling a story. And so this was something particular that my authors, for example, didn't do. Your mom went beyond. She became an author. She also invented some parts of her life. And this was really incredible. And the last thing I want to say is that if these authors are very important, if they make something really important and big, what makes them important is their children. So what Patricia did really gave her mom life back and took her out of the box and made her known to the whole family, the extended family. Patricia really didn't just publish her mom's book, she created a whole frame around it. She gave the context. She even created a whole a family tree that I remember had to be opened in many pages because it was huge. So you really put the finishing touches to this recovery of the past and the unity of the family. And it's very important, especially when these families come from a past of immigration where life was already broken in two parts when they decided to leave their country. So this is my introduction, and now I let you speak, and thank you very much for welcoming me tonight.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. That was really inspiring. I loved hearing that story about you working with Pat. And so thank you so much for joining so late as well. And so at this point, we'll go ahead and go into Pat's presentation, and she'll tell the story of her Italian-American immigration story. And then I'll start with sharing the slides, and Patricia's going to go ahead and talk us through the life of Orienta and her writings.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
All right, thank you. This is a quote from Professor Sarah's review in the Italian Americana Journal. Orienta, and I chose the title because it speaks to who my mom was to me and so many. But there is a novel in the collection of her writings, and you can read the quote from Professor Sarah's critique. So in the late 1990s, I found a cardboard box of papers in my mother's basement. Upon closer inspection, they turned out to be most of her life's writings. And it was really like getting to know my mother all over again. As quickly as possible, I published a private edition called Orienta in order to present her and each member of our large extended family a copy on Mom's 80th birthday celebration. I did so despite numerous errors by the typist I had hired. It was when I heard the presentation, as I previously said, by Professor Sarah, that I was really inspired to go forth and make this a more complete and better project. Mom's writings are rather thinly veiled stories of her life experiences and those who populated the family and culture she grew up with. The book starts out with the novel Rena, which closely parallels Mom's life up to the point she married my dad. And he was really portrayed by the character, Barry was his name, and he was the showbiz producer in the story. The many other stories, a play, a mystery, poems, short essays, reflect her extraordinary life view and how she overcame great tragedies to triumph and live a life shared with great love of family and culture, and always, always an appreciation of the art. Now, as we see in the next slide, she started dancing at an early age. Here's a picture when she was 11. One of the reviewers, editor-in-chief Roger DiPaolo of the Record Courier in Kent, Ohio, observed, Orienta was a woman ahead of her times. The daughter of Italian immigrants, she discovered her passion for dance at a 1924 wedding celebration by dancing the Charleston at age 6. And it was at that point she began a tradition of pursuing her dreams of stardom. Now, in doing so, she turned away from conventional expectations, marriage, family, housekeeping. She wanted her bid for fame. Making a career in show business as a teenager would bring hard lessons and tragedy. The book is a compelling look at the world of Italian Americans in Detroit leading up to the Great Depression. The values of La Familia, strong ties with family and neighbors, and struggling to make financial ends meet were ever present. In the next slide, we see her transition into her teen years. Orienta and Rena are interchangeable as we look at her story. In one of her later writings, Mom wrote, "Beauty without character is nothing but a shell." I think it reflects her experiences as she went from local dance competitions to nightclubs to traveling with troops. Her parents reluctantly agreed to let her, quote, go on the road because a caring young couple in the troupe agreed to chaperone and look out for her safety. Orienta refused to settle for stereotypical roles and behavior. She was compelled to forge her own path. In the next slide, we see some of her acrobatic abilities. Many of the professional pictures, and these are some that I refer to, came to light when I was visiting my uncle Danny Badia, that's Orienta's younger brother, just before I started to put the book together. Apparently, in the 1950s, a paisan moved into a house that had a large box of 8x10 negatives in it. Holding them up to the light, he immediately knew they were Orienta. He gave them to Uncle Danny, who eventually gave them to me. And fortunately, at that time, I found a photographer who could develop them. And so these are the result of some of those negatives. Other creative skills were portrayed in the next slide here. Orienta frequently designed and made her own costumes, and you can see some of them here. These skills, in great part, stemmed from the sewing and design skills she learned from her mother and her Aunt Carrie. Grandma went with her to every Detroit nightclub performance, as it was illegal for a 15-year-old to be in a nightclub. But Mom looked older and more sophisticated than her years. It was the Depression. Family needed the money. She learned quickly and channeled these skills into her creative visions. One of her favorite dance compositions was called The Flight of the Bumblebee, which was done to the famous musical piece. This invariably gave her standing ovations. She seamlessly incorporated a lot of acrobatic into her dance numbers. Her joy in her dance and in life in general was contagious. To be with Orienta was to laugh and to have fun, to feel affirmed. She especially loved children, and they knew it. As my late husband, Colonel Williams, said, "She is the grandest woman I have ever met." And I will second that. The next slide pictures Mom shortly after she married Dad. And you can see in the left-hand picture, there's two inscriptions. So the one in the lower right is for you. This picture is especially made for you, my dearest. So that's to Dad. And up in the upper left-hand corner, to my wonderful daughter, Pat, whom I love always, Mom, God bless you. So when I was visiting her, I asked for that picture and she gave it to me. Orienta's career took her across the country while raising 3 children with her first husband, my dad, whom she later divorced. Dad took on the character of Barry in the novel, but he was no wealthy producer. He too came from an immigrant family who struggled financially. Her second marriage brought 2 more children and ended in divorce. Her final marriage of over 43 years brought lasting happiness with Papa John, as we called him, a dear, kind, funny, and gentle man, despite his job as a top detective for the Detroit Police Department. Her writings are remarkable, not because she didn't get a GED until she was in her late 50s, but because her frank account of what she endured. You can't help, as you read, know that she will triumph in the end. And here's a little aside. She once was criticized for her lack of education. So that prompted her to go and take a Mensa test, which is, a Mensa is the largest and oldest IQ society in the world. And she turned out to score in the top 10%. Top 2%, excuse me, Mom. Now the next slide takes us to the beginning. And this is my grandmother, Larina Bucili Badia. And her actual word for word story of coming to America is included in the complete book writings. It is an amazing story. So the setting of Rina starts in Abruzzo, Italy, where Rina's grandparents, Alfredo and Lucia Naldi, have to decide if they will allow their oldest daughter, Teresa Naldi, to correspond with Giulio Bianco, who is a boarder with Lucia's sister in America. This entrance into Teresa's story is reflected in my own grandmother's story of coming to America during World War I. Her word, as I said, the account in the book is word for word. This part of the story is historically significant because it reflects the great migration to America by Italian men, many of whom chose their wives through such correspondence. The family structure, values, and cuisine are very familiar to first generation Italians and beyond in these chapters. In the next slide, we see Orienta's younger siblings. They were only too eager to have her teach them to dance and to help win cash prizes in local vaudeville shows. And the vaudeville shows were very common in the community. And the top 3 prizes were cash prizes. So they too helped the family with extra money during the Depression years. Younger brother, Danny Badia, his wedding picture's on the right there, went on to serve in World War II and got out of a hospital bed to serve in the Battle of the Bulge. Florida Atlantic University makes his and Aunt Leona's letters written during the war years available to the public, and it is a beautiful love story. The program is called Italians in Transition and can be found in the resources that will be available in the chat. I wrote a privately published book about his life and called it Dante Alighiero from Medbury Street. Now on the left, we have the picture, the wedding picture of Mom's younger sister and her husband, Dominic Celestini. And Dominic served in the Italian Army Alpine Patrol Unit, which allowed him to leave service 6 months early. As soon as he got out, he headed for America within 2 months of military separation. 3 months later, Mussolini came into power. I wrote a privately published book on the lives of Aunt Bambina, Orienta's younger sister, and Dominic, entitled Bambina and Dominic, an Italian Love Story. We look at Orienta's later years in the next slide. Okay. You'll see on the far left there, Orienta with her 5 children, and I'm standing in front of Mom. She not only had a lifelong love of dance, but she loved to write as well. And she continued to write and submit her work to various publications and newspapers. As reviewer Roger DiPaolo put it, her writings are similarly engaging, introspective pieces from the perspective of an outsider looking in. Some are lyric memories of an Italian-American upbringing that includes tables filled with food and holiday celebrations with dancing and accordion music. Material poverty is far different than poverty of the spirit, and the riches of her life is evident in these tales. Another story in the book, The Voice, is a thriller worthy of Rod Sterling. Not sure if our younger viewers know who Rod Sterling is, but it's worth looking him up. She also includes commentaries on the declining fortunes of Detroit, one of the nation's largest cities in her youth. All are written from the perspective of a woman who has found her voice and longed for stability. The next slide shares a drawing that revealed her suffering from early abuse by her first manager. Professor Sarah's journal articles, and she wrote a beautiful article, a very profound article, I think, in the Italian Americana journal, and that also is available in the resources, as well as the one from the University of Udine. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But her articles reveal poignantly the realities of being a second generation Italiana who had to constantly fight against unjust forces women faced in general, and young women in particular, during the Great Depression and beyond. Being a single mother when divorce was rare, and with 3 children, 2 with major health problems. My older sister was in a fire and incurred 3rd-degree burns over 40% of her body. And my older brother contracted polio before there was a vaccine. The only way to treat it was the Kennedy method, which meant applying alternately hot and cold packs for weeks. And it worked. Having 3 children, being single, divorced, it made it very difficult for her to find work in her chosen profession. It was an overwhelming challenge. But with the help of 2 elderly neighbors who babysat, she was able to work the late hours her profession required. And that's one thing Mom always seemed to do, was attract kind and compassionate people. Dealing with the aftermath of her abuse by a predatory manager when there was no Me Too movement was always in waiting for Mom. And you can see in the drawing to the left, which she did around 1976. You can tell how she suffered from having to keep silent about it. How did she overcome this and so many other challenges to become the joyful, caring human being that uplifted all who knew her? Overcoming these obstacles is inspiration enough for those struggling today. Her story is an unflinching account of what she endured and how she came to live a joyful life. And then the last slide we have here. This was a picture taken 2 months before she passed. I was very blessed to be able to take care of her last 4 years of life, and I went and lived with her. So here is Mom with one of her grandsons, and you can see the dance is still there. Mom's view that there is always beauty and joy to be found no matter what life throws at us has been my constant inspiration. Growing up with 4 of my siblings, we were very poor financially. We lived in a government housing project in Seattle with coal heat during World War II. Yet all of Orienta's children became successful in their career endeavors. She taught us the joys of reading, dance, art, writing, nature, and humor. I started writing at an early age. As a teen, it was clear to me that I would have to put myself through university, so I made sure my grades were good enough to get scholarships from some top universities. I loved writing and math, and eventually became a math teacher who taught creative dance during the summers. My volunteer work has always involved families and children. And as Natalie mentioned, I retired from being a court-appointed special advocate last year. And now I enjoy my extended family, including 16 great-grandchildren, the latest being 10.5-month Fiametta. And it is just such a joy to share the culture with the kids and the grandkids. Now, when I was taking care of Mom and cleaning up, I found a poem that slipped out of a journal. And lo and behold, it was written by my daughter, Kristen Tyson. And so what I would like to do is read this poem, which Mom had penciled in at the top of it. It said, "To me." So I would like to conclude with this poem that my daughter Kristen wrote to her. It's called "The Dance Inside You." The dance inside you dances to make us laugh, makes us dance too. Something special glows from you. I think it is love. I think it is the youth you never lost. Whatever it is, the light in your eyes and in your heart will always be a part of me, like the dancer's dance I see inside of you. And with that, I thank you.
So Pat, thank you for that wonderful presentation. It's so great to hear the story of your mother's life and to see all those beautiful photos of her. And so we're going to go through a couple of questions that I had for you, and then Tanya is going to assemble the questions that the listeners had in the chat, and we'll go into those questions. So while she's getting that ready, I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask, and then just some of the things that came to mind as I was reading the book and listening to you talk. So the first question I had is, I have a copy of the book, and thank you for sending that to me. And I have read through the novel and some of the other pieces in the book. And I noticed that Orienta really covered all types of written work. She has novel, short stories, poems, plays, and essays. And then I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about the book and how it's organized and what the reader would find in the various writings in the book.
Sure. I started with the novel Rena because it really is the story of her life. Mom was a voracious reader. She was always reading. And I think a lot of the other pieces and the fact that she did work in New York and did work in various places, exposed her to plays, stories, that kind of thing. But she also took a lot of the subject matter from her own life and people in her life. So I thought Rena, starting with Rena, was very appropriate because it gave us a view of how she grew up. And in the novel Rena, I can place a character or a person I knew with almost every character there. So that was really good. She was a person you could always go to if you had any kind of problem, family problem. She very understanding. Her ability to really put herself in somebody else's shoes and show amazing compassion was something I wanted to emphasize, and that's emphasized in that play, The Listening Post. And then there are so many short stories. There are 19 short stories, which I can pick out from her life. And she is sharing her life, and I felt that would be a very good follow through to the novel. But she also was a very spiritual person, not traditionally spiritual per se, although she was a Catholic, but she explored Buddhism and many other religious views. And so a lot of the reflections that she had, a lot of the experiences that she had are in the poetry, essays, and other writings. And they really address a lot of the problems that we address today. Mm-hmm. There's one story about where she was working in a post office, and it was a multi-ethnic group of people who worked there, and there was a African-American gentleman whose daughter had a blood cancer condition, and she desperately needed blood transfusions. And it so happened that her blood matched Mom's blood, and many people in the post office gave blood to help this little girl. Eventually, the little girl passed away, but she was able to be with her parents for I think a year or two longer, as I remember Mom telling the story. And then the parents later wrote a beautiful letter to Mom and to others, I assume, about their gratitude for donating their blood so they could have their daughter a little bit longer. And Mom reflects on that, and then she compares that with the race riots that went on in Detroit. I'm trying to remember the years, but they were very well publicized, and wishing that people could go back to that love and care for one another that was exemplified in the blood donation to the little girl. And so she also reflects on beauty. What is beauty worth? Physical beauty was so emphasized, still is. And yet, if you don't have that character behind it, if you don't have the compassion, what is it worth? So she was very reflective, and I just feel like I'm so blessed to be able to get inside of her heart and mind through these stories. And then she writes letters to my older sister and I. My older sister, who became a minister, she, as a 9-month-old baby, was burned over 40% of her body. And so growing up was not the easiest for her. And yet, my sister Lori, she found mom's joyfulness and the positive in life. She found faith. And really, I can't remember her ever spending time feeling sorry for herself. As a minister, she has helped thousands of people, is a beautiful, happy person. My brother, as I said before, he contracted polio before there was a vaccine. For weeks, mom staying up day and night, hot and cold packs. And it actually brought a cure for my brother, who has done very well. So if there's anything else, I just want to encourage everybody to definitely check out the references part. And you will see that I have 3 references to Ilaria's works because they have been such an inspiration to me.
Yeah, I looked at some of those references, and I think that it would be really I would encourage people to look at them, especially if you're interested in documenting your own family's history. And the next question I had really kind of leans into that, because so many Italian Americans have these amazing immigration stories tying back to their roots in Italy, and then their family, how they survived and thrived in the US. And so you said that you created an initial version of the book for your mom's 80th birthday, but then later on, you went through a process to actually ultimately publish the book. So could you talk a little bit about the time from your first draft to how you published the book for other people that might be interested in writing and publishing their family history?
Well, when I discovered the writings, I was living in Colorado, and I had visited mom, who's lived outside of Detroit at that time. And, I just wanted to get this all together. I wanted people to get a vision of her and the family, because the family is reflected in the writings. And her 80th birthday was coming up. And we were going to be transferred from Colorado to Ohio. And I had hired someone to do all the typing and pull it together. And it was supposed to be in my hands 2 months before we moved. And it turned out it was in my hands 2 days before we moved. And mom's birthday was right around the corner. So I had to get it together anyway, which I did. And I was happy that I could do it, but as a teacher, a former teacher, all those errors, they just nagged at me. And through the years, I also realized that time was running out for her generation. And I also was very interested in her brother's story and her sister and brother-in-law's story. So in that interim, I had written those private books. They were just for the family. But then when I moved from Ohio to Oregon, and I just had a great desire to take an Italian course and just get back into remembering family and appreciating family. And that is when I met Ilaria. And she was just such an inspiration to me. And I thought, I have to do this right. And so over the years, I slowly gathered it and made the corrections, and then did some research on which publishers were well known and checked them out. And I eventually went with the publisher that I did. And here we are.
Oh. Yeah, that's wonderful. So hopefully people will be inspired now to go back and write their stories. I have wanted to do the same thing, and I have a stack of material, but haven't done it. So now I feel like I really need to take care of that. So
And be sure, and my advice would be to be sure and get a publisher that will offer editing services.
mhm.
You know, you definitely need people to look at it, lots of people to look at it, critique it, and so forth. But in a sense, for me, the editing was just about catching mistakes, because I was very determined that every word would be Mom's word.
And then I just had one more question, a short question. And I know you've talked so much about all of the different aspects of Orienta and her amazing personality and depth and intelligence, her dancing skills. What do you hope that the reader most learns from Orienta's writings? If they could just take away one thing, what is it that you really want the reader to?
I think that no matter what tragedy you may encounter, what difficulty, that if you reach out, if you have a faith in yourself and a faith in general, that it doesn't have to pull you down. It can actually make you stronger. And just the knowledge that you're stronger can bring a great joy. And really just to love one another. It's just so simple to love one another and have fun doing it, you know? I think that sort of describes Mom for me.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tanya, and she's going to go through the questions that came through in the chat. And as we're doing that, feel free to add additional questions. We'll try to answer as many as we have time to get through.
Yeah, I just want to say there's some just really wonderful comments to you, Pat. Your book is fascinating, beautiful, all capitals from Antimo. Bravo, Pat. This is from Lisa. Your mother was an amazing woman, as are you. Antimo says, this is as inspiring as some of the best TED Talks, and the story so rich and layered with insights, powerful teaching and inspiration. Thank you, Pat. So just really heartfelt comments. I don't have any additional questions in the chat unless there's some now that people would like to ask. I think that you can push the ask question button maybe, or just raise a hand.
Tanya, I do see some questions in there. Maybe, I thought I did.
Oh, they
I
may
see.
have come directly to you instead of me. So
Okay.
I don't, yeah. So if you, sorry,
Okay,
they may have gone to your,
sure. I can go ahead and read them. So,
perfect. Thank you.
did you ever see your mom writing, or did she do it without you seeing it? And what did she tell you as she was doing? Did she want to have her work published? That's from one person.
I think Mom did want to have her work, some of her work published, like the reflections and the poetry, because she sent them into various magazines and the Detroit Free Press. Those smaller pieces, she did not submit Rena or some of the other more personal stories. And I don't know whether that was because life was so busy and at times chaotic for her that she didn't have time for that. But she loved writing. I mean, and encouraged me to write. And she still had, when I was staying with her those last 4 months, I still found a poem, my first poem, which was very short here. When I grow up, I'll have lots of riches. I won't scrub the floors or do the dishes. I'll ask for a hanky whenever I sneeze. I'll have someone peel me a banana when I please. So when I grow up, I'll have lots of riches. I won't scrub the floors or do the dishes. That was my very first poem. So she was always so imaginative, and we could make up stories. We made up dances, games. It was just there.
And then I have another question there. It looks like Patricia's asking, did you grow up in Detroit?
I grew up in Seattle until I was 16. And then we moved to Detroit at that time. And we lived with my Italian grandparents for 2 years. And then mom got a house 2 blocks away. I went there. I worked real hard, went to Cass Tech High in Detroit, which was kind of like DuPont in New York. It was sort of a special school for college-bound people. And I worked really, really hard because I just knew there was no money for college, but I wanted to go. But I did work hard and get good grades and was able to get scholarships to go. It was a great time to be in Detroit. The Supremes, the music.
Oh, yeah.
It was such a multi-ethnic city too. And while going to school at Cass, I met friends and students from all over the cities, from various groups, and it was a vibrant, beautiful time to be in Detroit as a teenager.
And thank you for that. That sounds really wonderful, wonderful city at that time. And then there's a question from Kathy, and she asked, did your mother learn love and joy from her parents?
Yes, definitely. Grandma could be quite strict, although I found a way to, I don't know, find her softer side. But she was very loving, very, very loving woman. One of her boarders, when people came over from Italy, most people would take in a boarder and help these folks until they could, earn enough money to get on their own. Well, one boarder got a job in California and left his car to Grandma as payment. Well, Grandma went out and learned to drive. Grandpa couldn't drive the car because he was just a little too short. And so there was kind of that dynamic going on, but always joyful, always family. I can remember the first thing Grandpa taught me, the first day we arrived, there was this big meal and all the relatives came, and Grandpa told me, now this is what you do with your spaghetti. And he picked it up with his fork and twirled it in a spoon. And I know different ways of eating spaghetti in Italy, but that was Grandpa's way. And he got up with me every morning and made me breakfast. And made sure that I had a good breakfast before I took an almost an hour's bus ride to Cass Tech High.
And another question from Shelley asks, what's next? Your next project.
What's next?
Mm.
Well, I think I'm going to, I just bought a new computer, which I haven't set up yet, but I want to get a program where I can go voice to text and start a daily journal. And then at the end of a certain period of time, gonna look at that and see if that leads me to some other place.
That's a great idea. Like, just instead of not doing anything, do something to start recording and work from there, right?
I think a lot of mom's writings happen that way.
Mhm.
She kept journals, and thank goodness she did.
And then we have a nice comment from Angela, who says, what a great tribute to your mother, and well done, Patricia. As her biographer, you allow her to live forever.
Oh, thank you, Angela. She certainly will for me and the family. We still talk about her all the time.
And then I see a question from Ilaria. Can you tell us more about your grandmother and how she supported or hindered Orienta's work? And do any of your grandchildren take from Orienta, or you see Orienta in your grandchildren?
Grandma Badia was larger than life. She was a very perceptive, bright woman, but she hardworking. I can remember when we moved in with them, she and Grandpa were working cleaning a doctor's office, and she just made sure that everybody did what they were supposed to do. Grandpa was softer hearted, and he was the one you could go and just speak your mind and your heart to. I found Grandma's soft side, so I could talk to her about personal things, but she could be kind of strict with the others. And there is a favorite family story about a time during Prohibition. And of course, the Italians could make wine for their own consumption. And apparently somebody came to the house and, said they had just come over, and it was really a setup, and they left a quarter under the plate. And the person left. And the next thing you know, the police are at the door wanting to take Grandma off to jail. And Grandma says, I can't, I have my children here. And Grandpa was gone at the time. And apparently the police person put his arm on Grandma's arm, and she pushed him off the porch. And there was some sort of negotiation, and eventually the situation got cleared up. But she could be very strong that way, but she could also be very kind and tender as well. And I love going down in the basement. That was where the real cooking happened, and cooking with her. And she would teach me. She would cook something or make something, and then she would say, okay, now you do it. It wasn't telling me step by step. You have to watch very carefully. So, and the second part of the question, I'm sorry.
Do any of your grandchildren take after Orienta?
Yes, they do.
Mhm.
Yes, they do. I have my youngest granddaughter, Sarah Tyson, who graduated magna cum laude in fine arts from Southern Oregon University. She is an actress, she is a singer, she is a musician, and she has a way with children just like mom did. She has them laughing and giggling. I just returned from Christmas in Klamath Falls with the whole kit and caboodle. And one of the most delightful parts of that trip was watching Sarah do karaoke with the great-grandchildren. And they were having such a wonderful time with her. I mean, I also, the next oldest granddaughter, got her degree in music as a cellist, but she sings beautifully, and that just passion for the arts is very strong in those two girls.
That's wonderful to see your mom come
Yeah.
through them.
Yes.
Yes.
They remind me of that a lot. And also there is a great granddaughter, Haley, who for the longest time was studying ballet, and actually came up here to Portland to try out for a training with the Oregon Ballet. And it was very competitive, and she was the one who made it and trained there. The oldest great granddaughter is a wonderful singer, musicians in the family. But I think in general, just the joy of being with one another. And my daughter, she cooks just like grandma cooked, just like mom cooked. She is fantastic. For Christmas, she cooked for 24 people as if it were nothing. Very Italian.
Thank you for all those wonderful responses. And it looks like we're at the end of the questions I see. Tanya, do you see any more in the chat? Any more new questions?
There aren't any that I can see in mine.
And then I see from Connie, thank you, Aunt Patty, for sharing my beloved grandma's story with so many. Love you. That was the last thing.
Now, if we get into the nieces and you know, mom's qualities, Connie is the epitome of Orienta's wonderful grace, and oh, what a cook she is.
Okay, so I think we're at the end of everything we wanted to cover tonight, and this is the book that we've been talking about, and the link to find it on Amazon was in the email reminder that you got today at 3 o'clock, and also in the email reminder that you received yesterday morning. So you can find it there. And I would encourage everyone to read the book. I found it really compelling, and Orienta is a great writer. She's one of those people that makes you want to, she's a page turner. Her book is a page turner. And so, and then you'll feel like you really know her after reading her book and her writings. I wanted to make sure everyone know that we have some future events coming up, and those will be coming out in the newsletter in mid-January. So in February, I'm actually going to be giving a talk about my experience renovating a family home in Italy, and that'll be on February 1st. And then on March 8th, we have Julie Brown, who will be coming to do a presentation on how to claim your Italian citizenship. These events are actually already on Italian Portland or in Eventbrite under Italian Portland, and I see that people are signing up for them. So you can also find them there, or look for our newsletter in mid-January, and they'll have the information as well to sign up. And then the reference links that Pat was talking about earlier that refer to the material from Dr. Larry Sarah, who was here presenting earlier. Those are also in your email reminder. So if you wanted to check those out for all what we were talking about earlier about the whole idea, the concept of documenting your Italian heritage, I would encourage you to go back and look at those. And lastly, the event recording will be sent out to all the attendees. Will probably be a couple of weeks before we get it out, but we did record it and plan to send it out to everyone. And so with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining our first event for 2022. And I was really happy to see so many people sign up and attend. Thank you, Patricia, so much for your wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it and
Certainly,
appreciate it.
it was my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pat.
And we'll see you all at the next event. Good night, and we're going to go ahead and sign off now. So thank you. Oh, and also thank you, Dr. Sarah, for joining us. Just
Sure.
enjoyed your intro. It really set the stage for everything that we wanted to cover
It
tonight.
was
And it's so
very
late
nice
and you're
meeting
still
you.
on, so it's
Very
wonderful.
nice meeting you. And if anybody comes to Florida, please come visit at Florida Atlantic University. This is nice to have friends on the other side of the United States.
Definitely.
Good night.
Okay.
Patricia, congratulations. Bye-bye. Thank you, Tanya and Natalie.
Buonanotte.
Buonanotte.
Okay. Good night, everyone.